On a prosperous farm in Brownstown, Wayne County, Michigan, just 2 days before Christmas, December 23, 1836, Lorinda Elizabeth Bronson was born. She was the eighth and final child of Lyman and Lucy Brass Bronson. In the year 1836, Michigan was still 1 year away from being accepted into statehood. The Bronsons were lovers of religious thought and devoted church attenders in the Methodist faith. Lorinda's father, Lyman, was a class leader in his church and knew the Bible well. Her mother, Lucy, taught her children to pray and have faith in God. In 1842, missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came into the Brownstown area and were kindly received when they arrived at the Bronson home. The family listened to the story of the gospel restoration, but Lorinda's father, Lyman, resisted some and went about disclaiming the doctrine of Mormonism. He was determined to prove it false. After many months of study and the testimonies of the missionaries, Lyman became convinced of the gospel's truthfulness. Both he and his wife Lucy were baptized in November of 1843. By the year 1845, a branch of the church was organized in Brownstown, and Lyman was called to preside over it. Neighbors of the Bronson family, who were once friendly and kind, began to be prejudiced against the Mormon faith. In 1846, Lyman sold his farm, stock, and equipment at a loss. He took his family and journeyed to Nauvoo, Illinois, to be with the saints. For more than 5 weeks, they traveled over rough roads and snow often 2 feet deep. Upon arrival, the family stayed only a few weeks before they left Nauvoo, with many others crossing the Mississippi River on the ice on 18th of February, 1846, one of the first families to leave Nauvoo. The Bronsons eventually reached the Missouri River, a place called Puncho, Iowa, which later became winter quarters. Here the family spent the winter. Through the winter, Lucy became very weak and died on the 7th of February, 1847, in Puncho. Lorinda was very young, a child of just 10 years old at the time of her mother's death. In the spring of 1847, Lyman, now a widower with several children, loaded 3 wagons and hitched a yoke of oxen to each of them. After several weeks of travel, they reached Council Bluff, Iowa, and camped with the saints. The Bronsons left Council Bluffs in May of 1847, traveling with the Edward Hunter Jacob Oates Company, which was specifically under John Taylor. After a time, the Bronsons and 10 others left the main company and traveled ahead of the others. Their advance party arrived in Salt Lake City on the 19th of September, 1847. Lyman and his family lived in the fort in Salt Lake for some time. By 1850, Lyman had remarried a widower named Nancy Ferguson Ott and was living with his children and wife in Cedar City, Iron County, Utah. But he moved his family again, this time to Fillmore, Millard County, Utah in 1852. He stayed in Fillmore for just 1 season. Lorinda, aged 17, remained in Fillmore, where she met Daniel Thompson. The couple married on the 4th of May, 1854. In 1867, her husband Daniel was called by Brigham Young to preside over the branch in Scipio, Millard County, Utah Territory. The family was asked to move to Fillmore to the fort in Scipio in the fall of 1867. In 1869, after just 1 year living in Scipio, Daniel took Lydia Ann Ivy as a second wife in polygamy. This certainly would have changed the dynamics of the Thompson family. It seemed, though, that the two families got along, served, and loved one another. Many years later, Daniel spoke at his wife Lorinda's funeral, claiming, "Notwithstanding having lived in plural marriage, I never knew her to be vexed at the trials which she had to endure." On July 29, 1870, under the direction of Sister Bathsheba Smith and assisted by then Bishop Daniel Thompson, the First Relief Society was organized in the Scipio ward, and Lorinda was called to be the first counselor. Because of Thomas Kane's friendship with Brigham Young, he often visited the Utah Territory. President Young invited Thomas and his wife Elizabeth and their 2 youngest sons to winter with him in St. George, Utah, the winter of 1872 through 73. The invitation was accepted in part due to Kane's ill health and the prospect of a comfortable winter situation. Mrs. Kane kept a journal of her trip and wrote very detailed letters to her father, William Wood, in Philadelphia. In 1874, Mr. Wood had Elizabeth's journal and letters published in a book entitled 12 Mormon Homes Visited in Succession on a Journey Through Utah to Arizona. He claimed he published the book with the design of getting sympathy for the Mormons who were threatened with hostile legislation by Congress. When President Young's group stopped in Scipio, Thomas and Elizabeth Kane and their 2 boys were invited to stay with my ancestor, Daniel Thompson. Elizabeth wrote, "Round Valley, or Scipio, is the poorest and newest of the settlements we stopped at, and has been much troubled with Indians. The Mormons say troubled with Indians, as we might say troubled with mosquitoes." Mrs. Kane claimed that when she and her family arrived at Lorinda's home, Lorinda was not there, but taking food in to Daniel's second wife, Lydia, who had been ill. This would seem to suggest that Lorinda was concerned for Lydia and showed love towards her. Mrs. Kane also wrote, "I could not but express my wonder at Lorinda's deft ways. She came in after her tea things were washed up and sat beside me with her knitting. She laughed when I praised her, saying that it was no wonder she had had a girl to help her these 3 weeks. But she never found the children in her way. They were a help. And so they were, the little eldest unrobing the younger ones for bed or waiting at the table without needing directions. They were well trained, as well as healthy, rosy children, and a little creature who could scarcely speak plainly sat on my knee and caroled like a lark." Being a physician and mother, Mrs. Kane would have appreciated healthy, obedient children. The Scipio ward was called by the church to live the United Order in 1874 with Daniel Thompson as president. Lorinda served alongside her husband in many capacities such as Sunday school, primary, and Relief Society teachers. She was also president of the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association. One of the things her daughter remembered the most was when she got ready to put them to bed, she washed them nice and clean and put on white nightgowns and caps. Then the children knelt by her knee and said prayers and were tucked into a warm trundle bed. Lorinda died on the 21st of June, 1907 at her home in Scipio, Utah. Her obituary stated that she died from an attack of spinal meningitis, probably caused by cholera. She is buried in the Scipio City Cemetery.